Hey there. If you enjoy listening to dark and mysterious crime stories while you're working, traveling, or just trying to fall asleep, then you're in the right place. So, make sure to hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? Now, relax, and let's begin today's story. Number 1. Riker Ackerley, born in 1988 to wealthy parents in Greenwich, Connecticut. Riker grew up with the kind of privilege that often breeds entitlement. Former classmates from his prestigious private school described him as charming but calculating, someone who could talk his way out of any situation. His father, a hedge fund manager, died in a boating accident when Riker was 16, leaving him and his mother with a substantial inheritance. His mother, struggling with grief and alcohol dependency, largely withdrew from his life, leaving Riker to navigate his teenage years with minimal supervision and abundant financial resources. By all accounts, Riker excelled academically, graduating from Yale with a degree in economics. He quickly established himself in the insurance industry, building a reputation as a skilled broker who could close seemingly impossible deals. However, beneath his professional success lay a pattern of interpersonal manipulation that would later become evident to investigators. Former colleagues at Meridian Insurance Group recalled how Riker maintained multiple phones and had an uncanny ability to keep track of elaborate lies. His executive assistant, Beatrice Morton, told investigators that he kept detailed spreadsheets of his conversations with different clients, ensuring he never mixed up his stories. She had assumed this was just exceptional customer service. What no one knew at the time was that Riker had already left a trail of broken relationships across Connecticut. 3 women from his past eventually came forward after the incident, describing similar patterns of deception and manipulation. Each believed she was in an exclusive relationship with him, only to discover he was simultaneously involved with others. In 2019, Riker made a strategic decision to move to Millbrook, a smaller town where he could establish a satellite office for his insurance business. The move, investigators would later conclude, was calculated. The town's size, around 3,000 residents, was small enough that he could become a notable figure, but large enough that people in different social circles might not regularly cross paths. Within months of his arrival, Riker purchased a luxurious colonial-style house on the outskirts of town and became active in local business organizations. He cultivated an image of a successful but down-to-earth businessman, making strategic donations to local causes and attending community events. The stage was set for what would become his most ambitious, and ultimately fatal, deception. Autumn Thorne was exactly where she wanted to be in life when she first met Riker Ackerley. At 32, she had transformed the struggling Millbrook Public Library into a vibrant community hub through innovative programs and modern technology integration. The daughter of Leopold Thorne, a respected local judge, Autumn had deep roots in the community and a quiet confidence that came from knowing her place in it. Their first meeting occurred in March 2021, when Riker visited the library to conduct research for an insurance seminar he was planning. Autumn would later tell Detective Hawthorne that what struck her most was how Riker seemed genuinely interested in her work. He asked thoughtful questions about library science and digital archiving, topics that usually made most people's eyes glaze over. According to library security footage, that first conversation lasted nearly 2 hours. Riker returned the next day with coffee for both of them, and what Autumn believed to be a serendipitous love story began to unfold. He told her he spent most weekdays traveling for work, but always made time to see her on weekends and Wednesday evenings, which she assumed was when he arranged his schedule to be in town. Their relationship progressed with calculated precision. Riker met her father, Judge Leopold Thorne, 3 months after they began dating. The judge, known for his strict evaluation of his daughter's suitors, was impressed by Riker's business acumen and apparent devotion to Autumn. In his personal diary, later recovered by investigators, Leopold wrote, "This young man could be the one for my daughter." There's something refreshingly old-fashioned about how he courts her. By December 2022, Riker had proposed to Autumn during a weekend trip to Vermont. The ring, a family heirloom he claimed had belonged to his grandmother, was actually purchased from an antique dealer in Boston, a fact that would later emerge during the investigation. Autumn began planning a traditional church wedding at the Millbrook Chapel, scheduled for June 15, 2023. Her colleagues at the library noticed a change in her during the engagement. The typically organized and level-headed Autumn became more distracted, often checking her phone and making wedding-related calls during work hours. She confided in her assistant that while Riker's busy travel schedule was difficult, she believed it would ease up after their marriage, when he planned to focus more on his local office. What Autumn didn't know was that many of those business trips were actually spent less than 2 miles away, with another woman who was also planning her wedding to Riker Ackerley. While Autumn Thorne represented old Millbrook money and tradition, Sage Winters embodied the town's emerging artistic spirit. Her cafe had become the go-to spot for the town's younger crowd since its opening in 2020. At 29, Sage had built her business from scratch after inheriting a modest sum from her grandparents, turning a defunct hardware store into a trendy establishment that served artisanal coffee and homemade pastries. Riker first walked into the Wild Sage on a Tuesday morning in April 2021, just weeks after meeting Autumn. According to the cafe's security footage, he spent nearly 3 hours there, ostensibly working on his laptop. He returned every Tuesday and Thursday thereafter, always during the mid-morning lull when Sage typically handled the counter alone. To Sage, Riker presented himself as a workaholic trying to escape his home office. He claimed to be a consultant who worked remotely for international clients, explaining his irregular hours and frequent unavailability. He told her he preferred to work from her cafe because the creative atmosphere helped him think, and, he would later admit, because her smile brightened his day. Their romance blossomed over quiet conversations during slow business hours. Sage later told investigators that Riker always seemed to know exactly what to say. When she mentioned wanting to expand the cafe, he offered detailed business advice. When she shared her insecurities about being a self-taught baker competing with formally trained pastry chefs, he praised her innovative spirit. Unlike his approach with Autumn, Riker kept his relationship with Sage more private. He explained that as a business consultant, discretion was crucial for his professional reputation. This conveniently justified why they rarely attended public events together, and why he preferred intimate dates at lesser-known restaurants in neighboring towns. The proposal came in January 2023, a month after he had proposed to Autumn. He surprised Sage after closing time at her cafe, getting down on one knee among the empty tables. The ring, which he claimed was a contemporary piece from a Paris jeweler, had actually been purchased from an online retailer. Sage began planning an outdoor wedding at Riverside Gardens, coincidentally scheduled for the same day as Autumn's ceremony. As the wedding approached, Sage's best friend and cafe manager, Phoenix Rivera, noticed subtle inconsistencies in Riker's behavior, but dismissed them as pre-wedding jitters. What none of them realized was that Riker was orchestrating an elaborate performance that would soon reach its devastating finale. The level of detail in Riker Ackerley's deception would later astound even veteran investigators. A search of his home office revealed a complex digital calendar system with color-coded entries, multiple phones labeled with different aliases, and a notebook filled with meticulous details about both women's lives, preferences, and daily routines. Riker maintained his double life through a carefully structured schedule. Mondays and Thursdays were devoted to Sage, under the guise of working from her cafe. Wednesdays and weekends belonged to Autumn, who believed he was in town only on those days due to his business travel. Tuesdays and Fridays were his buffer days, which he spent actually working and maintaining his insurance business, while using these days to create alibis and manage any unexpected situations. His phone records revealed an intricate system of call forwarding and automated messages. He maintained 3 separate phones, one for each fiancé and a business line. Each phone had carefully curated contact lists, photos, and text message histories. He even used different email addresses and social media accounts for each relationship, with varying privacy settings to prevent any overlap. The parallel wedding preparations presented the greatest challenge. Riker claimed to both women that he wanted them to have their dream weddings without his interference, using this as an excuse to remain largely uninvolved in the planning. He convinced each that his mother was too ill to attend, eliminating the risk of that potential complication. There were several close calls. In March 2023, both women happened to visit the same florist on the same day, missing each other by mere minutes. The florist, Dahlia Chen, later recalled feeling confused about the similarity of the groom's name, but dismissed it as coincidence. Another near discovery occurred when Sage's wedding photographer accidentally double-booked with Autumn's ceremony, but caught the error before any connection was made. Perhaps the most dangerous moment came in May 2023, just weeks before the wedding. Autumn and Sage both attended the same local business networking event. Riker, who had planned to escort Autumn, fabricated a last-minute business emergency. Through text messages recovered from his phones, investigators found him frantically coordinating with both women throughout the evening, ensuring they remained in different parts of the venue. The wedding preparations themselves required exceptional coordination. Riker had scheduled Autumn's traditional church ceremony for 11 a.m. at the Millbrook Chapel, while Sage's outdoor ceremony at Riverside Gardens was set for 2 p.m. He planned to claim a business emergency during Autumn's reception, slip away to change, and arrive at Sage's ceremony with enough time to complete both weddings before either reception ended. Detective Hawthorne would later find a notebook in Riker's office detailing his post-wedding plan. He intended to tell each wife that his job required him to travel every other week, allowing him to split his time between 2 households. He had already purchased 2 separate houses under different LLC names, located in neighboring towns. What Riker couldn't have anticipated was how a simple coincidence would unravel his entire scheme in a matter of minutes on the morning of June 15th. June 15th, 2023, dawned clear and mild, perfect weather for both an indoor church ceremony and an outdoor garden wedding. By 9 a.m., both venues were buzzing with activity. At the Millbrook Chapel, Autumn was getting ready in the bridal suite with her bridesmaids, while across town, Sage was having her hair done at Riverside Gardens' preparation room. The cascade of events that would expose Riker's deception began with something as mundane as a coffee run. Phoenix Rivera, Sage's best friend and maid of honor, stopped at a local coffee shop to pick up breakfast for the bridal party. There, she encountered Autumn's cousin, Blair Thorne, who was wearing a formal dress and carrying a garment bag. The 2 women, who knew each other casually through local business circles, exchanged pleasantries. Blair, excited about her cousin's wedding, mentioned how happy she was that Autumn was marrying Riker Ackerley. Phoenix, holding a tray of coffee cups, froze. She asked Blair to repeat the groom's name, thinking she must have misheard. The next 2 minutes of conversation would set in motion the day's tragic events. Phoenix immediately called Sage's sister, who was with the bride. Meanwhile, Blair, sensing something terribly wrong, rushed back to the Millbrook Chapel. Both women made frantic phone calls, and within 30 minutes, members of both wedding parties were frantically searching social media and making connections. At 10:15 a.m., less than an hour before the first ceremony was to begin, Riker arrived at the Millbrook Chapel, unaware that his deception had been discovered. He was intercepted in the parking lot by Judge Leopold Thorne, Autumn's father, who had already confirmed the terrible truth through his legal connections and a quick background check. Security camera footage from the chapel's parking lot captured the confrontation. The judge can be seen approaching Riker, who initially smiled and extended his hand in greeting. The smile vanished as Leopold began speaking. Witnesses reported hearing raised voices, with Leopold demanding explanations and threatening legal action. Meanwhile, Sage had already left Riverside Gardens in Phoenix's car, heading toward the chapel. Her arrival coincided with an increasingly heated argument between Riker and Judge Thorne. Multiple witnesses described the chaotic scene as both families converged on the chapel grounds. Security footage shows Sage emerging from the car in her wedding dress, while Autumn, having learned the truth from her bridesmaids, ran out of the chapel's front doors. Riker, now confronted by both brides and their families, attempted to back away toward his car, still trying to talk his way out of the situation. What happened next would be pieced together from multiple witness statements and the chapel's security cameras. Judge Thorne, a man described by colleagues as normally even-tempered and rational, lunged at Riker. In the ensuing scuffle, Riker pulled out a concealed handgun, a detail that would add another disturbing layer to his carefully planned deception. The presence of the handgun transformed an already volatile situation into a lethal one. According to witness statements, Riker's hand was shaking as he pointed the weapon at the gathering crowd, demanding everyone stay back. Judge Leopold Thorne, despite his daughter's screams, continued to advance toward Riker. Autumn's mother, Victoria Thorne, would later testify that her husband appeared to be in a state she had never seen before, a combination of blind rage and protective instinct. The respected judge, who had spent decades upholding the law, was now watching his daughter's life crumble before his eyes. What happened next occurred in a matter of seconds, though witnesses would later describe it as if time had slowed down. Riker, backing away from the advancing judge, stumbled on the curb. The gun discharged. Judge Leopold Thorne collapsed, shot in the chest. In the ensuing chaos, several of the wedding guests, including 2 off-duty police officers, rushed toward Riker. Sage's brother, ex-military, was the first to reach him. Security footage shows Riker raising the gun again, but before he could fire a second time, 3 men tackled him. During the struggle, a second shot rang out. The gun had discharged again, this time striking Riker himself in the neck. The following moments were captured in fragmented emergency calls to 911, with multiple panicked voices reporting shots fired at a wedding. First responders arrived within minutes to find Judge Thorne bleeding on the chapel steps and Riker unconscious on the pavement. Both brides, still in their wedding dresses, were being held back by family members as paramedics worked. Despite immediate medical attention, Judge Leopold Thorne was pronounced dead at the scene. Riker Ackerley, having sustained a severe gunshot wound to the neck, was rushed to Millbrook General Hospital, where he died during emergency surgery 2 hours later. In the midst of the chaos, Autumn and Sage found themselves sitting together on a bench outside the chapel, both in their wedding dresses, both in shock. A responding officer's body camera captured a brief moment when Sage reached over and took Autumn's hand, a gesture of shared trauma and understanding that would later become symbolic of the tragedy's aftermath. The events at Millbrook Chapel made national headlines, not just for their shocking nature, but for the question they raised about how one man's deception could go undetected for so long in a small, close-knit community. As one wedding guest later told reporters, "What's most terrifying is that until the very end, he thought he could talk his way out of it." He never stopped trying to manipulate the situation, even with a crowd of witnesses and 2 brides standing right in front of him. The 2-month investigation that followed the Millbrook tragedy revealed layers of deception that went far beyond the double wedding scheme. Detective Hawthorne's team, assisted by digital forensics experts, uncovered a labyrinth of carefully constructed lies that painted a disturbing picture of Riker Ackerley's true nature. The first breakthrough came when investigators cracked the encryption on Riker's 3rd phone, one that neither Autumn nor Sage knew about. This device contained communications with a woman named Valencia Reyes in Worcester, Massachusetts. Valencia, a pediatric nurse, had also been dating Riker for 6 months. Text messages revealed he'd been laying the groundwork for another potential wedding, telling Valencia he needed to wait until next year due to his mother's illness. Riker's mother, Cordelia Ackerley, finally broke her decades-long silence about her son when investigators tracked her to a luxury retirement community in Florida. In a 6-hour interview, she revealed patterns of manipulation that began in Riker's childhood. He had learned to pit his parents against each other for gifts and privileges, maintaining elaborate lies about school and friends. By age 12, he was running complex schemes, convincing each parent that the other had agreed to various permissions and purchases. The financial investigation proved especially illuminating. Forensic accountants discovered that Riker had been operating a sophisticated pyramid scheme through his insurance business. He had been using new client premiums to pay for both weddings while maintaining the illusion of successful business ventures. Over 20 clients had been defrauded of nearly $2.3 million, money that he had masterfully shuffled between various accounts and investments. Perhaps most chilling was the discovery of Riker's personal journal, hidden in a wall safe behind his home office bookshelf. The journal, spanning 5 years, revealed a man who viewed relationships as strategic games. He had developed a scoring system for his deceptions, awarding himself points for successfully maintaining multiple relationships and navigating close calls. The final entries focused on what he called the ultimate challenge, the double wedding scheme. Former colleagues from Meridian Insurance Group came forward with new information during the investigation. His executive assistant, Beatrice Morton, revealed that Riker had been collecting detailed information about the personal lives of wealthy clients. Information that investigators now believe he was planning to use for future blackmail schemes. The digital forensics team recovered deleted files from Riker's laptop, showing he had been researching countries without extradition treaties. Travel documents indicated plans for a trip to Venezuela, scheduled for 3 weeks after the wedding date. Investigators believe he may have been planning to disappear with the fraudulent insurance money, leaving both wives behind. Another disturbing discovery came from Riker's weekend house in the Berkshires, a property unknown to either bride. There, investigators found a fully equipped surveillance room with monitors showing feeds from cameras he had installed in both women's workplaces. He had been monitoring their movements and interactions, ensuring his elaborate schedule would never fail due to unexpected visits or meetings. The investigation also revealed that Riker had been seeing a psychiatrist under an assumed name, Dr. Eleanor Blackburn, breaking confidentiality after his death due to public safety concerns, shared session notes describing a man who viewed emotional manipulation as an art form. He had spoken proudly of his ability to maintain multiple lives, referring to himself as a conductor orchestrating a symphony of deception. These revelations would later form the basis for a FBI case study on relationship fraud and financial exploitation, using Riker's methodical documentation of his own deceptions as a template for identifying similar patterns in other cases. The study would eventually help law enforcement prevent several similar schemes across the country, though none quite as elaborate or tragic as the double wedding deception of Millbrook. The investigation that followed would reveal the full extent of Riker Ackerley's deception. Detective Kai Hawthorne and his team discovered that beyond the 2 weddings, Riker had been setting up an elaborate post-marriage life. He had secured 2 separate houses under different LLC names, established separate bank accounts, and even created detailed cover stories for his planned absences from each household. The handgun recovered at the scene proved to be legally registered to Riker, who had obtained a concealed carry permit 3 months before the wedding day. This detail particularly disturbed investigators, suggesting the possibility that violence had always been a contingency in his plans. The Thorne family had lost not only their future son-in-law to deception, but their patriarch to violence. The courthouse where Judge Leopold had served for over 2 decades established a scholarship in his name, helping law students who planned to focus on family law and victim advocacy. Sage Winters initially closed the Wild Sage Cafe, unable to face the constant stream of curious onlookers and reporters. However, 3 months after the incident, she reopened with help from the community, including Autumn Thorne, who had become an unexpected friend through their shared trauma. The investigation also uncovered 3 other women in different parts of Connecticut who had been involved with Riker during his relationship with both brides. Each came forward with stories of elaborate lies and manipulation, though none had progressed to engagement. One of these women had even been house hunting with him a month before the planned weddings. Although Riker Ackerley's death prevented any criminal prosecution, the investigation into his insurance fraud scheme continued posthumously. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit recovered approximately $1.4 million of the stolen funds, which were returned to the defrauded clients. Had Riker survived, prosecutors estimated he would have faced multiple felony charges, including fraud, theft, and involuntary manslaughter. Instead, his legacy remains as a case study in elaborate deception and its tragic consequences. Story number 2. On a sweltering July afternoon in 2019, the facade of suburban bliss was shattered in a way that would haunt the community for years to come. At the center of this tragedy were the Hendersons. Thaddeus, a 45-year-old investment banker with a reputation for his work ethic and community involvement, and his wife Margot, a 43-year-old part-time yoga instructor known for her vibrant personality and infectious laugh. They had been fixtures in the community for over a decade, their seemingly perfect marriage the envy of many. Next door lived the Coopers, Elaine, a widow, and her 19-year-old son Liam, a college sophomore home for the summer. The Coopers had moved in 5 years ago, and while they kept to themselves more than most, they were generally well liked by their neighbors. No one could have predicted that these ordinary lives would collide in such a catastrophic way. Thaddeus Henderson had always been driven by ambition. Born to working-class parents in rural Iowa, he had clawed his way up the social ladder through sheer determination and an almost obsessive work ethic. By his early 30s, he had established himself as a rising star at a financial company. His colleagues admired his sharp analytical mind, and his clients appreciated his no-nonsense approach to wealth management. Margot Sinclair, as she was known before her marriage, had a different trajectory. The daughter of a college professor and an artist, she grew up in a household that valued creativity and self-expression. She studied modern dance at the university, dreaming of a career on stage. However, a knee injury in her senior year derailed those plans, leading her to pivot towards yoga and wellness coaching. Their paths crossed at a charity gala in 2003. Thaddeus, already successful but lacking in social graces, was immediately drawn to Margot's vivacity and charm. For Margot, Thaddeus represented stability and the promise of a comfortable life, that would allow her to pursue her passions without financial worry. They married a year later in a lavish ceremony that was the talk of their social circle. The early years of their marriage were happy ones. Thaddeus's career continued to flourish, and he took pride in providing Margot with the life he felt she deserved. Margot, for her part, threw herself into being the perfect corporate wife, hosting dinner parties and attending social events that were crucial for Thaddeus's networking. She also began teaching yoga part-time at an upscale studio, finding fulfillment in helping others achieve balance and inner peace. But as the years wore on, cracks began to appear in their carefully constructed life. Thaddeus's work hours grew longer, his ambition pushing him to chase ever bigger deals and clients. He was rarely home before 9 p.m., and even when he was physically present, his mind was often elsewhere, constantly checking his phone for emails or market updates. Margot, approaching her 40s, found herself increasingly restless. The yoga classes and charity committees that once filled her days now felt hollow. She began to question the choices that had led her to this point, wondering if she had traded her dreams for a gilded cage. The couple's failure to conceive, despite years of trying, added another layer of strain to their relationship. By the summer of 2019, the Hendersons' marriage was a carefully maintained facade. To the outside world, they still appeared to be the golden couple. Thaddeus continued to excel at work, recently closing a deal that put him in line for a partnership. Margot's yoga classes were more popular than ever, her students drawn to her warmth and apparent serenity. But behind closed doors, they were virtual strangers. Conversations, when they happened, were perfunctory and centered around schedules and social obligations. Physical intimacy had become a rare occurrence, each touch laden with unspoken resentments and unfulfilled expectations. Neither Thaddeus nor Margot was willing to admit, even to themselves, how far they had drifted apart. It was easier to maintain the illusion, to go through the motions of a happy marriage, than to confront the emptiness that had grown between them. Little did they know that this unacknowledged chasm in their relationship was about to become the catalyst for a tragedy that would shatter not just their lives, but the entire community of Riverside. The Coopers had moved into the house next door to the Hendersons in 2014, following the death of Elaine Cooper's husband, Dr. Reginald Cooper. A respected oncologist, Reginald had succumbed to the very disease he had spent his life fighting, leaving Elaine to raise their son Liam alone. Elaine, a soft-spoken librarian, had initially struggled to adjust to life in the new community. The move from their modest home in St. Paul had been necessary to escape the memories that haunted every corner of their old house, but the affluent suburb felt alien to her. She found solace in her books and in tending to the garden that soon became the envy of the neighborhood. Liam Cooper was 14 when they moved in, a lanky, introverted teenager more comfortable with computers than with people. The transition to a new school had been difficult, and he often found himself the target of bullies who mocked his second-hand clothes and quiet demeanor. It was during this time that Thaddeus Henderson had taken Liam under his wing, offering him a job mowing lawns and doing odd jobs around the neighborhood. Over the next 5 years, Liam had blossomed. The awkward teen grew into a handsome young man, his natural intelligence finally finding an outlet in his computer science studies at the university. Despite his growing confidence, Liam remained devoted to his mother. He worried about her isolation and loneliness, and made a point of coming home most weekends, even when his friends were planning parties or road trips. It was on one of these weekend visits in early June that he first encountered Margot Henderson in a new light. Elaine had always been grateful for the Hendersons' kindness, particularly Margot's efforts to include her in neighborhood activities. She often spoke of Margot's generosity, unaware of the complex emotions brewing beneath the surface of her son's polite nods. The spark that ignited the affair between Margot Henderson and Liam Cooper was as unexpected as it was intense. It happened on a balmy evening in early June, during one of the Hendersons' legendary summer barbecues. Thaddeus, as usual, was holding court near the grill, regaling his colleagues with tales of his latest financial coup. Margot, feeling particularly isolated amidst the crowd, had retreated to the relative quiet of the pool house to replenish the ice bucket. Liam, who had been reluctantly dragged to the party by his mother, chose that moment to seek refuge from the noise and forced socializing. He entered the pool house not realizing it was occupied and found Margot struggling with a large bag of ice. Their eyes met, and in that instant, something shifted. He moved to help her with the ice, their hands brushing. They stood there, momentarily frozen, the cold of the ice contrasting sharply with the heat building between them. It was Margot who broke the silence, her voice husky as she thanked him. Liam, usually so articulate, found himself stammering in response. That brief encounter set the stage for what was to come. Over the next few weeks, Margot and Liam found themselves manufacturing reasons to be in each other's company. It started innocently enough, Margot asking Liam for help with her laptop, Liam offering to help in her garden. Each interaction was charged with an undercurrent of attraction that they both tried to ignore. Their first kiss happened almost a month after the barbecue. Liam had been helping Margot set up for one of her yoga classes in the park. As they finished, a sudden summer storm broke out. They ran for shelter under a nearby gazebo, laughing and breathless. As the rain poured down around them, Margot looked at Liam and felt a surge of desire she hadn't experienced in years. Before she could think better of it, she leaned in and kissed him. From that point, their affair escalated quickly. They were reckless, driven by a combination of Liam's youthful passion and Margot's desperation to feel alive again. They met in secluded spots around town, in the back row of the local cinema, in a hidden corner of the public library, and, most dangerously, in the Henderson home when Thaddeus was at work. Each encounter left them craving more, the gulf in their ages forgotten in the heat of their stolen moments. Margot felt rejuvenated, rediscovering parts of herself she thought long lost. Liam, for his part, was intoxicated by Margot's experience and the taboo nature of their relationship. But as the summer wore on, the strain of maintaining their secret began to show. Close calls became more frequent, a neighbor almost catching them in an embrace, a suspicious glance from Elaine when Margot's name came up too often in conversation. The guilt, too, started to weigh on them both. Liam struggled with the knowledge that he was betraying Thaddeus, a man who had been nothing but kind to him. Margot found herself lying more and more to her husband, each deception another crack in the foundation of her marriage. Yet despite the risks and the guilt, neither seemed able to end the affair. They were caught in a whirlwind of passion and need, blind to the devastating consequences that loomed on the horizon. July 15, 2019, dawned hot and humid, the air heavy with the promise of an approaching storm. It was a Monday, and Riverside stirred to life as its residents prepared for another week of work and routine. For Thaddeus Henderson, it began like any other day. He rose early, donned one of his impeccably tailored suits, and left for the office before Margot had even stirred from sleep. Margot woke later, her mind already racing with plans for the day ahead. Thaddeus had informed her the night before that he would be working late, a crucial client dinner that could seal his partnership deal. For Margot, this meant an opportunity. She sent a text to Liam, her heart racing as she suggested he come over in the afternoon. Liam, who had been agonizing over the affair for days, saw the message as a chance to end things face to face. He replied with a simple, "Okay," resolving to break it off before the situation spiraled further out of control. The day passed slowly for both of them. Margot went through the motions of her morning yoga class, her usual serenity replaced by a nervous energy that her students couldn't help but notice. Liam, at his summer job, found it hard to focus on the lines of code on his screen, his mind constantly drifting to thoughts of Margot and the conversation to come. At 2:30 p.m., Liam made his way next door, glancing furtively around to ensure none of the neighbors were watching. Margot ushered him in quickly, her face flushed with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. It was Liam who broke the silence, starting to say that they needed to talk. But Margot, misreading his intention and driven by a desperate need to feel desired, cut him off with a passionate kiss. Despite his reservations, Liam found himself responding, his resolve weakening in the face of Margot's intensity. What happened next was a blur of discarded clothes and tangled limbs as they made their way to the master bedroom. All thoughts of ending the affair were temporarily forgotten as they lost themselves in each other. Meanwhile, across town, Thaddeus Henderson sat in his office frowning at his computer screen. The numbers for the client presentation weren't adding up, and he knew he'd have to redo a significant portion of his work. Frustration mounting, he made a snap decision. He would go home, regroup, and return to the office later to finish up before the dinner. At 3:45 p.m., Thaddeus's car pulled into the driveway. He noticed Liam Cooper's beat-up Honda parked a little way down the street, but thought nothing of it. Probably helping Elaine with some errand, he mused as he unlocked the front door. The house was quiet as Thaddeus entered, but something felt off. A half-empty glass of wine sat on the coffee table, unusual for Margot at this hour. Then he heard it, a muffled sound coming from upstairs. Frowning, he climbed the stairs, the noise growing louder as he approached the master bedroom. What Thaddeus saw when he opened the door would be forever seared into his memory. His wife, the woman he had loved for 15 years, was in their bed with Liam Cooper, the 19-year-old guy he had mentored and trusted. Then, with a roar of rage and pain, Thaddeus lunged forward. His hands, so used to manipulating numbers and shaking on business deals, now curled into fists as he grabbed Liam, yanking him off the bed. Margot screamed, scrambling to cover herself and separate the two men, but her efforts were in vain. Thaddeus's first punch caught Liam squarely in the jaw, sending the younger man stumbling backward. But Liam, driven by adrenaline and fear, fought back. The two men grappled, crashing into the dresser, sending framed photos and trinkets scattering across the floor. In the chaos, no one noticed the heavy crystal bookend that fell from the dresser's top. No one saw it until Thaddeus, in a fit of blind rage, grabbed it and brought it down on Liam's head with a sickening thud. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden silence that followed. Liam crumpled to the floor, blood pooling rapidly around his motionless form. Margot's scream pierced the air as the full horror of what had just transpired hit them all. In that moment, as storm clouds gathered outside and sirens wailed in the distance, the lives of everyone involved changed irrevocably. The idyllic facade of Riverside had been shattered, and nothing would ever be the same again. The piercing wail of police sirens shattered the usual tranquility of the community. Neighbors peered out from behind curtains, curiosity mingling with apprehension as squad cars and an ambulance screeched to a halt in front of the Henderson residence. The first officers on the scene were met with a tableau of horror that would haunt them for years to come. Inside, they found a shell-shocked Thaddeus Henderson, his hands covered in blood, sitting on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands. Margot barely clothed and hysterical. The room bore all the hallmarks of a violent struggle: overturned furniture, shattered glass, and smears of blood on the hardwood floor. Detective Ava Rossi, a veteran of the police department's homicide unit, took charge of the scene. Her first priority was securing medical attention for Liam Cooper. As paramedics worked feverishly to stabilize him, Rossi began the delicate process of piecing together the events that had led to this tragedy. Thaddeus, still in a state of shock, was taken into custody without resistance. Margot was separately questioned. Their stories, fragmented and emotional, painted a picture of a long-simmering marital discord that had exploded into violence. As word spread through the neighborhood, a crowd began to gather at the police cordon. Among them was Elaine Cooper, who collapsed in grief when informed of her son's critical condition. She was quickly whisked away to the hospital, where Liam was fighting for his life in the intensive care unit. The investigation moved quickly. Forensics teams combed through the Henderson home, collecting evidence and taking photographs. The crystal bookend, now a potential murder weapon, was carefully bagged and tagged. Neighbors were interviewed, their statements adding context to the relationships between the Hendersons and the Coopers. One neighbor recalled hearing raised voices from the Henderson house earlier that afternoon, but had dismissed it as a television playing too loudly. Another mentioned seeing Liam enter the Henderson home around 2:30 p.m., noting it because he thought it odd given Thaddeus's usual work schedule. As night fell, the gravity of the situation became clear. Liam Cooper was pronounced dead at 9:47 p.m., never having regained consciousness. The charge against Thaddeus Henderson was elevated from assault to second-degree murder. In the days that followed, more details emerged. Margot, racked with guilt and facing intense scrutiny, admitted to the affair with Liam. Her statement, given through tears at the police station, provided a timeline of their relationship and the events leading up to that fateful afternoon. Thaddeus, advised by his hastily retained attorney, remained silent, but his colleagues at the company painted a picture of a man under immense pressure, working long hours in pursuit of a partnership that had seemed within reach. None, however, had suspected the depth of his marital problems or the capacity for violence that had been unleashed. The case against Thaddeus Henderson was building, but Rossi knew that in the court of public opinion, there would be no clear villains or heroes in this story. Only victims, each in their own way, of the secrets and lies that had finally come to light in the most devastating manner possible. But no one has ever expected the plot twist that's about to come. And twist that will shock everyone, including the Hendersons. The Henderson trial began on a crisp autumn morning, 6 months after the events that had shaken Riverside to its core. The county courthouse, a stately building of red brick and white columns, was surrounded by reporters and curious onlookers. Inside, the tension was palpable as the judge called the court to order. Prosecuting attorney Veronica Talbot, known for her sharp mind and even sharper tongue, laid out the state's case in her opening statement. She painted a vivid picture of Thaddeus Henderson as a man consumed by rage and jealousy, who had brutally murdered a young man in the prime of his life. Talbot's words were measured but impactful, her gaze sweeping across the jury as she promised to prove Henderson's guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. Defense attorney countered with a narrative of his own. He portrayed Thaddeus as a devoted husband and pillar of the community, pushed to the brink by a betrayal of the deepest kind. Sterling suggested that the death was a tragic accident, the result of a confrontation that had spiraled out of control. As the trial progressed, a parade of witnesses took the stand. Forensic experts testified about blood spatter patterns and the force required to cause Liam's fatal injury. Neighbors recounted the events of that day, and character witnesses spoke to the personalities and reputations of both Thaddeus and Liam. But it was Margot Henderson's testimony that captivated the courtroom. Over 2 grueling days on the stand, she laid bare the disintegration of her marriage and the evolution of her relationship with Liam. Her voice trembled as she described the moment Thaddeus had walked in on them, and the horror of watching the confrontation unfold. Under cross-examination, Sterling tried to paint her as an unfaithful wife whose actions had driven her husband to temporary insanity, but Margot held firm, accepting her part in the tragedy while insisting that nothing justified Liam's death. Elaine Cooper's testimony was brief but powerful. Still grief-stricken, she spoke of her son's kindness and his dreams for the future, all cut short in an act of violence. Her quiet dignity in the face of unimaginable loss moved many in the courtroom to tears. As the trial neared its end, all eyes turned to Thaddeus Henderson. Against his lawyer's advice, he chose to take the stand. His testimony was a study in contrasts, moments of apparent remorse interspersed with flashes of the anger that had led to Liam's death. He spoke of the pressure he'd been under at work, the growing distance in his marriage, and the shock of discovering his wife's infidelity. When describing the fight with Liam, Thaddeus claimed he had never intended to cause serious harm, that he had simply lost control. As the trial progressed, expert witnesses from the field of psychology were called to provide insight into the minds of those involved in the tragic events. Dr. Cho explained that Thaddeus's actions could be understood through the lens of what psychologists call intermittent explosive disorder, characterized by episodes of violent, aggressive behavior disproportionate to the situation. She pointed to Thaddeus's high-stress job, his unexpressed marital dissatisfaction, and the shock of discovering his wife's infidelity as contributing factors to his violent outburst. However, under cross-examination, Dr. Cho conceded that while these factors could explain Thaddeus's behavior, they did not excuse it. She emphasized that many individuals face similar stressors without resorting to violence. The defense called a specialist in marriage and family therapy to testify about the psychological impact of infidelity. Friedman described the profound sense of betrayal and loss of identity that a person may experience upon discovering a spouse's affair. He likened it to a form of psychological trauma, capable of triggering extreme emotional responses. The psychological analyses presented during the trial offered a complex picture of human behavior and motivation. They highlighted how a combination of personal history, societal expectations, and immediate circumstances can collide to create a perfect storm of tragedy. After 7 grueling weeks of testimony, evidence presentation, and legal arguments, the fate of Thaddeus Henderson rested in the hands of the jury. As Judge Blackwell sent the 12 men and women to deliberate, a tense silence fell over the courtroom. After a short recess to consider all factors, Judge Blackwell returned to deliver her sentence. Citing the violent nature of the crime balanced against Thaddeus's lack of prior criminal history and the unique circumstances of the case, she sentenced him to 18 years in state prison with the possibility of parole after 12 years. As Thaddeus was led away in handcuffs, the full weight of the tragedy seemed to descend upon the courtroom. There were no victors here, only lives irrevocably altered by a moment of passion and a split second of violence. Outside, as news of the verdict spread, the crowd's reactions were mixed. Some felt justice had been served, while others argued the sentence was too harsh or too lenient. But all agreed on one thing: the events that had unfolded in Riverside would leave an indelible mark on the community for years to come.